All right, from the top.
Are we going from the top?
From the top.
In a unique episode of 6 Minute Increments, we are live in both the Focus Practice Management Studios and here live on location in Saratoga, New York, with a very unique lawyer and friend of mine for many years, Michael Dezik from Albany Law School fame. Michael, welcome to the show 6 Minute Increments.
It's great to be here.
Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about what's unique in your practice and what exactly you do? I think they'll have a lot of questions.
So I have a niche practice in the area of estate planning, elder law, special needs, and long-term care planning. I operate a very small shop out of Niagara Falls, New York, with my law partner and a small group of hardworking staff to make sure that our clients can plan for the worst, but in a way that's thoughtful, purpose-driven, and executed correctly.
Now, one of the things I know that you do is what I think a lot of people would call Medicaid planning. What's Medicaid planning?
So Medicaid planning is really what I would refer to as long-term care planning. So you are looking at the financial impact of the expense of long-term care. And that can take the form of private pay, which has its own benefits and pitfalls. The benefits are through a private pay plan is you spend your life working, you accumulate resources, you spend those resources on your long-term care. The benefit to that is it does breed options for the type of facility, the type of care that you're receiving, how long you're going to receive that care, versus the Medicaid program, which does limit the type and amount of care that you're going to receive. So Medicaid planning, I guess, would be the process of determining, all right, are we happy with spending our money? Or are we now planning to have something to pass along to the next generation and limit our financial exposure? So from my end, I don't think that there's a right answer to that question. From a strictly, fiscal, budgetary end, it's probably not a sustainable one long term. But we work within the rules to get our clients the intended results based on their planning goals.
And what's unique is that while you're up here, meeting with different clients, I'm actually up here for a conference on behalf of the long-term care industry. What would you describe as been the relationship? I know you and I've had lengthy conversations about this over the years, and I think there needs to be a better partnership and relationship, but what's been your experience?
I would agree with it. I think that there's probably an unreasonable sense on my end that they're on the dark side, and probably an equally unreasonable sense on the long-term care industry side that I'm on the dark side. I've always looked at my practice as really one of pragmatic mitigation. And what I mean by that is the rules are so complicated when it comes to Medicaid asset protection or Medicaid asset availability and what's deemed a transfer of assets versus what's not, that it's easy for people to kind of unknowingly step on these landmines. So one of the bigger parts of my practice isn't necessarily hiding assets. We're not just trying to get assets out to the kids, but say someone had the audacity to pay for their daughter's wedding and then get sick. That could be $30,000-$40,000 hit. That person is going to goes to a nursing home. If they just play by the rules and spend down, that $30,000 is going to come back and haunt them, kind of tragically. And the rules aren't really designed to cover something like that. So my goal in that instance would be to try to mitigate the exposure for the client so that they're not being penalized for 3 months of services because they paid for their daughter's wedding, but to try to cover that using their other resources and make sure that the nursing home gets a steady paycheck. So I think there's a lot of rush to get people applied for benefits without a lot of due diligence in making sure that there aren't kind of skeletons in the closet. And I'm finding that in my practice, that's becoming more of the goal than really even just generational wealth transfer. It's just cleaning up these kind of goofy little rules that are out there that can kind of jump up out of the bushes.
And talk a little more about like the experience with the rules. I mean, there's people hear about the 5-year look back. They hear about gifting. People will always ask, what is the minimum I can give without having tax problems? But because there's so much information, I think that often it overwhelms those who are trying to do the right thing. How often do you find that you are counseling or advising people that they've messed up the rules?
Fairly often.
What's the 5-year look back?
So when you're applying for Medicaid, it's a three-legged stool. You have to meet certain income requirements, and basically for long-term care, do you make less than it costs for your care? That's an easy hurdle to jump over.
And that's just income, right? That's
just income. Yes.
Yeah.
Then you have the resource rules, which says that if you're a single individual, you get to keep about $32,000. If you're married, you get to keep around $180,000, or up to $180,000. So the resource rules are fairly generous, especially if you're married. But when they're looking at that income and resource allowance, that's just to determine immediate eligibility. Once they determine, okay, well, you walk, talk, and quack like a Medicaid recipient, then they look back 5 years. They do a 60-month audit. And my Department of Social Services people will appreciate the 60 months versus the 5 years. It's a 60-month period that Medicaid will go backwards from the date that you apply for Medicaid and audit every transaction, every financial transaction that you have. So if you've given anything away, and they call that uncompensated transfers. If you've given assets away within that 60-month period, then Medicaid imposes a penalty period based off of the total value of those assets. So the way that the rules work is that the gift that I made, or the uncompensated transfer that I made 4 years, 11 months, and 27 days ago, impacts me no differently than the gift I made 4 minutes ago. Department of Social Services just puts a plus sign in between those two numbers, adds them up, divides it by, and you guys have a different regional rate, but where I am, it's just a little over $12,000. So for every $12,000 you give away, that's 1 month of ineligibility. That means you're on your own. You have to privately pay for that month, and Medicaid will not cover you.
Which, of course, they're already trying to get on Medicaid, so they don't have a lot of money or assets. How do they actually go about auditing to know whether or not you made the gift? Like, how do they get the information?
Well, well, they get it from you, Brett.
They don't get it from me; they actually get it from you.
So no, you're required to bring your homework. So when you go to apply for Medicaid, you collect your 60 months worth of bank statements from each and every account that you've had opened or closed within that 60-month period, and you have to provide that to Department of Social Services. They then go through the fine-tooth comb and they examine everything. Counties vary. Some have a $2,000 threshold, some have a $1,000 threshold, but they're going to go through the fine-tooth comb and determine what assets you've given away. And the presumption that Department of Social Services is given is that every single cent that comes out of that account is an uncompensated transfer unless otherwise rebutted. So you take $2,000 of cash out of your account, you got to show where that cash went, and it's up to you to rebut their presumption, not the other way around. And we every case is different. If it's readily obvious on its face. Okay, well, that was the payment on the Discover card, or that was a car payment, or that went to the mortgage, or this went to Sears. The more we use debit cards, the more those things are pretty obvious on their face. But you do see larger transactions every once in a while. Again, like the $30,000 wedding scenario, where now you have to go and explain that, and try to get them to side with you that this either meets another exemption, or you got to have a tough talk with your client and explain to them, sorry, Missy's wedding is going to cost you 3 months of Medicaid.
So, I mean, how does somebody possibly prepare for that? Like, what could you possibly do to start to organize your finances or your picture? Or how do you work with a client to try and even go get that information? Especially, a lot of people are going to a skilled nursing facility. They might be infirm, they might have had a major health event, they may have dementia. I mean, how do you get the information?
So my brother was in the military, and prior preparation prevents poor performance.
Beth was in the military too. We try to throw that in as often as possible.
That's a true enough statement, but I mean, come on, in the real world, how many people are actually prepared like this?
Yeah.
Well, that's why people like me exist.
Yeah.
So, I always start off initially having good advanced directives. That is, as far as I'm concerned, they tend to be kind of the redheaded stepchildren of estate planning, where nobody gives them a lot of, they don't give them a second look. But having an appropriate power of attorney with gifting and appropriate, elder law and long-term care planning provisions, which is something that we do religiously in my firm, means the difference between being able to do something or not. So that's our backup insurance plan. Beyond that, you can look towards, when I meet with folks and I'm done harping on their advanced directives, I then look at, all right, well, what's on the table versus what's off the table, because we have available resources and we have exempt resources. So there's all sorts of crazy exemptions. And they don't necessarily track the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service code. So the Medicaid has its own set of rules for that. So you go basically asset by asset by asset and you say, okay, well, if we had to apply for Medicaid today, this is what's on the table and this is what's protected. And generally, where that breaks down, just to kind of give you an example, if you have a lot of assets in qualified retirement accounts and not a lot of assets in, your regular, investment fund or your regular cash accounts, that person has a lot of now exempt resources. They're not counted for Medicaid, but not a lot of available resources. So they may be readily applicable versus someone who has the same amount of money, but it's all in a non-retirement investment account, all in cash accounts, and then a very small amount of retirements. So everyone's story is a little bit different there. So in the latter example, where we have a lot of non-qualified regular investments in cash, we might consider, do you want to put some of that aside into, say, an irrevocable trust? And that trust is designed to house those assets, keep them far enough away from you so that Medicaid doesn't count them, but not so, but keep you as in charge of them as possible. So we're kind of walking that tightrope when we're drafting these things. And that plan, again, because we can't get around the 5-year or the 60-month rule, you would have to set something like that up 60 months or more before any reasonable likelihood of a skilled nursing home placement would take place. So that is kind of our plan A planning. And we have a lot of talks with our clients about, what are the health concerns, why are you here today? Is there anything poking up on the horizon? And then you're really having that talk, say, okay, well, where do you see yourself in 3, 4, 5, 6 years from now? And kind of get an idea of, all right, well, are we dealing with, early or mid onset, dementia? Are we dealing with like an ALS diagnosis? And all of those different, I mean, even under a dementia, dementia is not a diagnosis, but even in a dementia situation, there are tons of underlying conditions which all have different care arcs, and most of them are somewhat predictable, and you can say, all right, well, we can bet on the 60 months, or maybe we have none of these issues, and 60 months is no problem because we're 58 and we're just looking to get this put together right now, so we don't have to worry about it later on. So those are the bigger considerations when you're putting together kind of a long-term care plan.
How do you
I know
bill
from-
for this? Oh, go ahead, Brett.
Well, I was just going to say, and I would definitely want to know from the billing perspective, but because I think a lot of people don't understand the amount and level of work that goes into it. But I know from our side, very often working with the long-term care industry, the biggest issue that comes up is the piece that you touched on earlier, which is the income, and what's known as the net available monthly income.
NAMI.
And the NAMI. And the NAMI that does not get turned over to the facility on time, because a lot of the times family or people are thinking that they still have to pay other bills or have other obligations, and they have taken that NAMI money. How do you talk to or explain to a family who's maybe helping a loved one, what is NAMI?
So and it's funny you bring that up, and I don't want to make light of it, but I do find that is a concept that a lot of my clients have a tough time kind of swallowing, that there is still a contribution. And the best way I can kind of explain it to them is that there's a copay. Medicaid at its core, it's an insurance company. It is providing insurance for long-term care, and you have to contribute towards that based on your income, and that's your copay. I do often get pushback because people say, well, how am I going to pay the mortgage? How am I going to pay the taxes? How am I going to do this? How am I going to do that? And it becomes you really have to educate the client that this needs to get paid, and you either need to pay it now or you're going to need to pay it later. And a lot of times I'll get a client calling, like, whoa, I got a $6,000 bill to the nursing home. I thought I was on Medicaid. And lo and behold, no, they haven't been remitting. It takes 6 months to get on the Medicaid in most cases. They haven't been remitting, the $1,000 a month Tammy that we talked about at our initial consultation. And yeah, you owe it. That's the bottom line.
That is the biggest thing, I think, in our industry on the long-term care side, where we see things go awry, is the fundamental misunderstanding by the people, because they do think it's like Medicare or Medicaid. I'm now covered. I don't have to worry about this. There's no more contribution. But that is the single biggest thing that consistently leads to some sort of a collections action or other debt that the skilled nursing facilities are carrying, which then gets shifted around in a variety of ways. But Beth had a great question live in the Focus Practice Management Studios.
Well, as you know, Mike, this show is called 6-Minute Increments because a lot of us lawyers bill on 6-minute increments. How do you bill for this type of planning? Is it a flat rate? Do you bill hourly?
So I'll try to be brief. I gave up in the most recent iteration of my career. I gave up hourly billing. So 6-minute increments still sends shivers up my spine.
You're in rehab.
I couldn't be happier to have
he's
the PTSD
recovering
from my billable hour days.
Yeah.
So no, my practice is based in almost entirely. I have a few less than the number of fingers on my right hand files that I bill on hourly basis. We prefer to set flat fee billing. And what I like about it is, first of all, I don't have to chase those billable hours and figure out my timesheet for the last 2 weeks because I'm generally kind of a lazy lazy timekeeper. And it also gives my clients finality. So so
let
I would
them
say
know
about
upfront what the
99%
fee
are
is?
flat fees. I'm sorry?
You let them know upfront what the fee is.
Oh, absolutely. I don't put pen to paper before I come to an agreement with my clients on fees. And generally speaking, especially when we're doing any sort of Medicaid planning or preparation, one of the things that we do, and it makes for a fairly easy selling point, is we take our fee up front as a minimum, it really is as a minimum flat fee. So our services are due and payable upon our retention. So that becomes part of the spend down. And then they can rely on my staff to assist with preparation of the Medicaid application, myself to assist with the pre and post planning components to that. So we build our fee in to kind of it to take into account the complexity of the situation. But yeah, I've become militant and almost almost I don't want to say rude, but I'm very clear with my clients as to what our billing arrangement is and how much we're to be paid, and if they want to proceed, then that's.
They clearly like you, though. They got you to drive all the way out here to Saratoga from Lewiston to basically meet with a bunch of other clients. As you look at a client or people out there, if you had to make one recommendation, what's the time frame that they should be looking at to start this process? I mean, is there ever too late? Is there ever too early? Is there a sweet spot?
That's a tough one to answer, because I don't really have the good analytics on it, because it's so different. Every case is unique, and I know that's kind of like a cop-out answer.
It's a lawyerly answer.
Yeah,
We're good for them.
Generally speaking, you don't want to be so young. Brett and I, we're in our mid-40s. It's way too early for us to be considering something like that. Unless we married like a much older person or something like that. You really, I think, if you're really trying to strike where the iron's hot, generally around retirement age tends to be a good age to start considering it. Even if you don't pull the trigger, at least to start asking the question, okay, what does our long-term care picture look like? How are we going to finance it? How much do we want to make sure that we have set aside for little Johnny and little Susie? That's tends to be a good age. Major health events, also a good time to start considering that. If you've had a minor stroke or a heart attack, just looking at those things, while it's fresh, while you have the good information, and say, okay, what are these considerations, and what's our foreseeable future looking like? So it's we take the counselor in our job pretty seriously when we're talking to folks, because half the time we're not even really discussing complicated legal aspects. We're delving into very specific and very personal points to their life and health issues.
Well, I appreciate that you have flat fees, but Beth and I still do bill in evil 6-minute increments. So I don't want to hold up too much more of your time, but from live in Saratoga and back to Beth here in the Focus Practice Management Studios, we got to make sure we do our marketing plug.
Yes, please like, subscribe, and share. We would appreciate it.
And it wouldn't be right if Mike and I were in the same area and we didn't at least discuss that he might be watching a Walker Texas Ranger Marathon after this event.
Oh, absolutely.
That's an inside thing for two of us.
You're getting out of here right after this, right?
Yeah. Okay.
I got plans.
Thank you,
All right.
everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.